Oh, Jake's talking about the Hamburglar again.
Get the stick.
Better boil some water.
Gentlemen, let's broaden our minds.
Are they in the proper approach pattern for today?
Negative.
All weapons! Now! Charge the lightning field.
Blame it on the Griddler.
I blame it on the Bossa Nova, personally.
That's because you're playing the blame game.
You could have said you blamed it on the rain, but we'll overlook it.
We've done that bit too many times. We gotta switch it up.
You're right.
Well-traveled Walters. Woo, I'm struggling. Well-traveled Barbara Walters. That's what I meant.
Is that a vocal warm-up?
Well-traveled Barbara Walters. That's hard. Try it.
I'm not going to because it is hard.
Well-traveled Barbara Walters. That is difficult. Still can't quite get it. Anywho.
Oh, you know what else is a tough one? Defining a cult classic.
Ooh, that truly is. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Dispatch Ajax. I'm Jake.
I'm Skip.
That's Skip.
Yep.
Growing up as a geek, a nerd, burgeoning cinephile, especially a child of the 80s and 90s, cult classic films were an essential building block of our cinematic language and understanding. We all love cult classics. But that can mean something different to everyone. And we will try to grasp it a little better on our journey today to the history, the brief and very minimal history of cult classics, their status today, and their outlook for the future. Before we drop some knowledge on you of maybe some cult classics that have come out in the past 10 years that you need to get plugged in on, because they will be cultural touchstones for the generation after this one. We could go on and on about the history of cult classic films. I mean, from Freaks in 1932, to Reefer Madness, to Plan 9 from Outer Space, to Rocky Horror Picture Show, to Wicker Man, to Fritz the Cat, to Bad Taste, to Pink Flamingos, to Showgirls, to Big Lebowski, to The Room, to Southland Tales.
So many. Okay, let me cross a lot of these off my list here. Fuck, got a lot of these on here. Go, continue. My list is a lot smaller now.
Well, keep that pen ready, because you will have more to add. The history of cult films is transgressive oddities, low-budget indie fare, underseen gems, big-budget misunderstood flops, or bizarre personal projects with a devoted niche. Cult classics are a staple of the specialness of cinema and how it relates to the viewer and the medium. Now, sometimes this was like from outlawed film reels way back in the day to grindhouse drive-ins.
True.
From the 80s VHS closets to the high seas of internet streaming. Cult films have had a long and powerful journey. But that journey may be coming to an end.
Well, I mean, movies might be coming to an end. Who knows?
Well, movies will all be made, just not by humans.
Well, theaters are definitely coming to an end.
Theaters are having a tough time. But part of this is that is some of the reason why cult films may be a thing of the past, or rather that they are changing distinctly in how they are recognized and passed on. But we'll get to that. Let's get a little bit into what makes a cult film. Generally, a cult film is defined as a movie that has developed a dedicated and passionate fan base over time, often due to its unique or unconventional qualities. These are typically have small initial audiences, but through word of mouth, they gain popularity. Oftentimes, they would have unique screenings devoted to the film and underground distribution, or maybe not pass through the main hallways of cinema.
Right, so you cannot include Star Wars, but you can include mainstream stuff like Rocky Horror or Big Lebowski.
Well, as something we'll find out, a cult film is amorphous in its definition.
I agree.
And really fluctuates between who's discussing it. I think it is safe to say that just because it came from the mainstream or was a tentpole production with big cast, big actors, big budget, doesn't mean it can't develop into a cult film. But I will say that it is more difficult for that to happen.
Right.
And I think there are often better instances of what it means to truly be a cult film and all that entails.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get into some of that. They're often characterized by quirky, offbeat, sometimes controversial content, and are often attracting viewers looking for something different or countercultural. They can be in any genre, but often have a unique niche appeal and a strong community aspect behind them,
Mm.
Which tend to, at least in the past, lead to groups that develop ritualistic and cult behaviors.
I don't know that cult films have to. I mean, because when you talk about Rocky Horror or Big Lebowski, there are people that stage productions where people, participate in the experience or whatever, like cult ritualistic behaviors. But I don't know that that is necessary.
Oh, no. No, no, it is not a precursor, but it is the thing that helped develop some of these films and rose them up the ranks of
Mm.
visibility and being known. And it is that like cult devotion to these films
Mm-hmm.
that I think arose both like the terminology and what made them stand out
Mm.
and become classics of our day.
Mm-hmm.
It was often an elaborate subculture where members engage in repeated viewings, in these specific big time tentpole cult films like a Rocky Horror Picture Show or The Room or Big Lebowski, where you get like dialogue quoting and audience participation. But it is an inclusive definition as well to include box office bombs or obscure transgressive films that were shunned by the mainstream.
Mm.
It's again a difficult term to describe everything that a cult film can be because
Right.
it's drawing from a lot of things. Originally the term was first used in the 70s to describe the culture that surrounded underground films and midnight movies, though cult was in common use in film analysis for decades prior to that. Now, again, they trace their origin back to controversial and suppressed films that had been kept alive by dedicated fans over many years. But over time, the landscape of film has changed. And especially in the 80s, after failing at the cinema, some cult films became regular fixtures on cable television or profitable and widely distributed on the home video market.
Mm-hmm.
Again, some of these have inspired film festivals. Some have ritualistic viewings and participation, like a Rocky Horror every Halloween.
Hell yeah.
Mm.
Big Lebowski has those too. I've actually attended some of those where they will do
Oh,
skits.
yeah. And a lot of it is about like it's the love for the movie and the community comes together to participate in the viewing, sharing that experience as a group.
That phenomenon that I think is not exclusive to, but mainly tied to Rocky Horror and Big Lebowski, the audience participation, the appeal of cult films in general, I think has a lot to do with community, even with sports, whatever. But in a non combative or violent way that you would think of tribalism. And cult movies in general give you that sort of camaraderie that creates a community.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think a lot of that often comes from the content of these films that tend to develop that cult fervor behind them.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of cult films frequently break cultural taboos. Many feature excessive displays of violence, gore, sexuality, profanity, or different combinations of those things.
Would you consider Faster Pussycat Kill Kill a cult film?
I mean, from the hip, yes.
I would.
Yeah. Now, in the past, a lot of this led to controversy, sometimes censorship or outright bans, while less transgressive films may attract similar amounts of controversy when critics call them frivolous or incompetent. Films that fail to attract requisite amount of controversy may face resistance when labeled as cult films. Mainstream films and big budget blockbusters have attracted cult followings similar to more underground and lesser known films. Fans of these films often emphasize the film's niche appeal and reject the more popular aspects. This is where we need to talk about a couple other labels you can put on films that also are part of the Venn diagram of cult films. One of those is underground films. So underground films deal, I think, more with movies that are made outside of the conventions of the system. A lot of times they have a raw, sometimes amateurish quality to them, and they kind of buck a lot of formal conventions and terminology, both in their production and in their distribution.
Can I present a possibility of one of those?
Yes.
Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter.
Geez, I think that would work. There's definitely a... How would we delicately describe this?
It's one of the first films I feel in the sort of post-analog era as an example of a amateurishly made cult film. It was probably shot on handycams or maybe, digital tape, but it was not a traditional 8mm or high 8 type. And I think the reason it got made was because now that technology is way more accessible starting in that era.
Yeah. And I think with the then proliferation of digital, you have, a whole realm of new filmmakers who there are less barriers to making a film. And whether you're shooting something for, $10 million or you're making something on a estimated $100 budget, like Who Killed Captain Alex from the Ugandan Lookalikes, super action.
Whoa.
That is a cult film in and of itself that has become worldwide. You can find it just about anywhere, and amateurish is definitely a way to describe it. But it's the exuberance and just the feel that film has spread it for since 2010 to all corners of the globe, and developing a fan base that truly loves it. Now, it has a certain vibe to it that not everyone might get down with, but as opposed to an underground film, which that is, it's a cult film because it may not have been popular at the time, but over the years has developed a strong following around it. You could say something else like The Room,
sure,
similarly, or definitely a lot of Ed Wood's productions.
Oh yeah, Plan 9 from Outer Space is maybe the most, other than Rocky Horror, the most famous cult film of all time.
Yeah. An underground film is more of an aesthetic resource definition, while a cult film is more about how the audience perceives it and reacts to it and develops around the film.
Right. That's fair. Because
now, also there's a go ahead.
No, you've got a script. Let's do that.
No, I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, I was just thinking, there are underground things that are extremely well regarded in the spectrum of budget and studio involvement or whatever, that I think you were right when you mentioned that a little different than cult films. They're just kind of underseen, but it's really hard to nail that down. For instance, the documentary American Movie, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah. It's amazing.
I don't think it's a cult film, but I think there is a culture around it. I think it's just an underseen film. If more people saw it, I think it would be extremely popular.
Well, that gets us into another definition. You have cult, you have underground film,
right,
and then you have underseen film.
Okay.
And an underseen film that lacks recognition, the low viewership or general lack of awareness amongst John Q. public. These often have potential quality. A lot of times they were critically praised, but few people saw them, kind of developing into a cinematic gem that falls through the cracks, either by way of distributor, marketing, lack of exposure, no name recognition. I think something like this, again, this is for early filmmakers. You have a lot of underseen gems. Christopher Nolan's The Following.
Ooh, yeah.
Pi from Darren Aronofsky.
Sure.
Now, these are both, a lot of times, they can be underground in the way that they were made, both of those were black and white, made for relatively minimal budgets compared especially to their later projects, with relatively unknown actors. And a lot of times the production and distribution is either self-financed or through a smaller company, or is later bought by a big company after doing well on circuits and different festivals and whatnot. But essentially, they're more like homegrown in that underground sense.
Well, it's interesting with Following, because Following is a precursor to Memento. It's like his test run for Memento, kind of like how what's the Sam Raimi In the Woods that he did before Evil Dead. It's that kind of thing. This is our proof of concept, and now let's make the big one. Even though the big one is still cult and underground. Like Evil Dead is one of the most cult films of all time.
Right, but in the way that there's a cult following behind Evil Dead, but there isn't a cult following for In the Woods.
True. Well, yeah, especially since that only came out 20 years ago. They found the 8mm under Bruce Campbell's bed or whatever.
Yeah. And I would say something like Pi. I think it is appreciated.
Great movie.
But as an underseen film, there wasn't a dedicated, organized community of fans championing it.
True.
It's just that most people don't know it exists. Similar to The Following. Again, not to belabor these, but I think these are good examples of early filmmakers before they had major success. They went on to do big films, and people know those big films. People know Interstellar. They know The Dark Knight. They know Inception, but they don't necessarily know The Following.
Right.
Again, it's an underseen film, but not necessarily a cult film.
How would you categorize Blood Simple?
I think...
Or even Miller's Crossing?
I would probably say those feel more like underseen gems than they do cult fare.
Okay.
I would say maybe even if I were to pick a cult film from the oeuvre of the Coen brothers, I think the two that come to mind would be Barton Fink.
Okay.
And the
Hudsucker Proxy?
The baby one.
What?
Hudsucker's there.
Well, Hudsucker's a really interesting example because that was their first big budget movie. They spent a lot of money on that movie, and it bombed.
Yeah. Raising Arizona. That was one.
That's their more cult film, sure. I think we considered a cult film.
Yeah, I think there are elements to the Hudsucker that fit, but I just don't know if they're... One, I think some of the stuff that you need, again, you need the fan base to really gather up around it. You need to develop traditions within the cinephile community, stuff like midnight screenings, a real fervor for the film that lasts many years. I think that it doesn't need it, but I think the best cult films that really make them stand out is the transgressive content. It needs to be unusual, quirky, offbeat, or controversial in themes, often breaking cultural taboos, whether that's violence, sexuality, unique narratives that generally fall outside of the standard conventions. I think there are elements to that in Raising Arizona. I think there are elements of that in Barton Fink. I don't know if Hudsucker has those.
Well, it's got a quirk.
And I think
a quirk counts.
Oh, it has a quirk, but I also don't think the quirk is, if we're rating quirk levels, I don't think it's to a Barton. I don't think it's to an Arizona level.
Well, I agree. I don't think it's as quirky as Raising Arizona, but you don't think it's as quirky as Barton Fink?
No, I mean, I'm remembering the end of Barton Fink, with John Goodman, that huge character and the fire in the hallways and then screaming around. I mean, it's Hudsucker's it's cute, but it's not doing the same things. It doesn't need to,
If Hudsucker Proxy wasn't a big budget movie, if it wasn't a big flop, would it have been considered a cult hit, do you think?
I think one of the big things that's keeping it, other than its possible lack of transgressive themes, that it doesn't have that same fan appeal. I don't think people talk about Hudsucker Proxy.
No.
I don't think people are huge fans of Hudsucker Proxy.
I don't think it's a bad movie,
both
though.
of the time and afterward.
Yeah.
It's not saying it's a bad movie. You can have great movies that aren't cult films.
Yeah.
They can be underseen. They can be underappreciated.
Yeah.
But if we're trying to make a definable, tangible thing that we can sink our teeth into, some things just don't make the cut. And it's not even necessarily a better thing to be a cult film.
Oh, no.
I mean, The Room is a cult film, not because it's good.
No, because it's bad.
Exactly.
Yeah, not in the so bad it's good. It's in the way that it's so bad it's absurdly bad, but still kind of like watchable in a weird way.
Yeah. There is an ineffable quality to some of these films where it just connects to the fan base.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily even it could be at the time, could be long after the fact. I think
Yeah.
a lot of cult films, they tend to just not do well out of the gate, and they develop a fan base, which makes it a cult film because it can't be one of those without that.
Like Troll 2.
But it's not necessarily, yes, again, a horrible film that is an enjoyable watch, but you're not laughing with the film.
No.
You're laughing at the film.
Right.
But that doesn't matter in a cult status. This isn't a red ribbon. This is lifting the film up from the floor up to the ceiling as, something that we all love. We're not saying it's great. We're saying we love it. Highlander isn't a great film, but we love Highlander.
Right. I do have one film that I will hold off on mentioning because I'm wondering if you're going to get to it, but I think I have a perfect encapsulation of that as a modern cult. Well, not modern as in the last 10 years, but a modern-ish cult film. So let's see how this goes.
All right. So we have a decent idea, I think, of where we feel makes a cult film. There are books and books, pages and pages of what makes a cult film and the further details, but we're not trying to do a podcast on what makes a cult film. We just kind of want to give you a little layout for the discussion. I'm really interested with this about the evolution of cult films and what it means for today and for the future. Especially in the 80s into the 90s, a lot of cult films were passed around via physical media. And a lot of it was about access to these films. The harder it was to find, the more mystique a film had. Mm-hmm. And when you finally got to see them...
And half the time, they're not what they say they are.
If they lived up to some type of expectation, you felt the need to pass that on.
Guys, when you hear the word guys, turn around and greet the newest infamous tape in your collection.
I think that's how Big Lebowski gained
100%.
Its status. It was on that secondary market, renting those VHS tapes and later those DVDs. And then you saw it, just like, oh, I gotta show my buddy this.
Guys, you gotta see this tape.
And it went on and on.
Donnie Darko was the exact same way.
Donnie Darko's a perfect example. A film that did middling to low at the box office, but on the rental circuit, it really found a foothold. It really spoke to an audience and became something special for the cinematic culture. Now, in our current landscape, DVDs are dead. They're a niche market similar to vinyl records. You have collectors, but it's not a market mover. Most places, they don't even sell physical media in a retail location. There's no more video stores you can go in and browse through and find those gems that maybe they're underseen, maybe they're even a cult classic, but they were all at your fingertips to both find out about, discover, see, enjoy, learn to love, and then pass along to people. You don't have that anymore. Now everything is video on demand or peer-to-peer file sharing.
Everything's computer. There are still some locations you can go to find those, but they're very niche.
Yes. It used to be that those were the arbiters of culture and cult films.
Mm-hmm.
But back then you had to seek out independent video store or the repertoire cinema to watch these. But now everything's just at the click of a button. Not only can you see everything, but you can make anything. Some people are hinting that this might be the death of cult cinema. Now, it's debatable whether this ease of access is a hindrance to developing a dedicated fan base for a perfect particular thing, but there is at least one other element that is standing in the way, and that is the fracturing of the mediascape. Up until, it depends on who you ask, and you can find particular points of derivation and nullifying end bits, but we can all, I think, agree that essentially monoculture is dead. Everyone now exists in their bubbles. And through social and media fragmentation, which has been heightened by algorithms, you are siloed into your own media space. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the fact that there isn't a monolithic thing that everybody experiences, interacts with, likes or dislikes, that kind of gives you a touchstone that then things that are not that mainstream, they have nothing to compete with at this point. Now, everything's kind of on a similar level. Now, you do have things that break through. I think Game of Thrones, that was one of the last dying embers of the monoculture. You have things that pop up, like we all know about Talk to a Girl or whatnot. Or, there used to be a time when we were trying to figure out whether a dress is blue or gold.
You do still have the major networks, too, which are shockingly still watched. Like you have Survivor and you have Dancing with the Stars. Those are still what we used to call mainstream and are still mainstream and seen by a majority of people. The Bachelor, it's seen by a majority of people. I don't watch that shit, but...
I don't think they're seen by a majority of people.
Well, at least they're known.
That is the thing. They are known, but I think now, one, part of the monoculture was a time. So if you wanted to watch X-Files, you had to be there at 8 o'clock on Friday night. If you wanted to be checking out and debating what the shark means with the symbol or what these people on the island are doing, you had to tune in to see Lost and figure out all the details of this wild speculative island. Now, if you want to watch Survivor, watch it the next day. Watch it a week from now. Watch it 6 months from now. You can binge watch all Dancing with the Stars after the fact.
Yeah.
You're always going to have a certain, dedicated fans of those things. Yes. But there is nothing personally other than sports that I watch essentially when it's on. Everything is after the fact. Everything is chunked and segmented. We wanted to talk about Daredevil recently. Many, many moons ago. The Daredevil Born Again. You had seen it pretty much long after the fact that when it came out.
Yeah.
And I have been slowly making my way through the Netflix Daredevil again because I wanted to catch up before I saw this new thing. It's not that we won't all eventually see it, but the fact that we're not participating in a shared media experience any longer, that everything is segmented, everything is on our own timetables, and everything is on demand, that breaks the monoculture. Now, it isn't that we all don't know what the Great Race is, or Survivor or whatever, but the people who are watching that, especially on broadcast air television, it is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
To the point where you can't say that most people have seen this. They might know it. Again, just an anecdote example. I had a coworker just the other day who was like, "Hey, have you heard about this Squid Game? I just found out about this." Now, to me, that's like, Squid Game was, 4 or 5 years ago when it was big?
It was a while ago.
It was a while ago. But, again, we're all in our own bubbles now. You see what your algorithm shows you. You are exposed to what your particular friend group was, whether it's in person, online, in the workplace, whatever. And you can be completely cut off from what other people might consider huge cultural media titans that just go completely by the wayside because you have no idea about that because it's just not part of your media infrastructure because there is none anymore.
I agree with you in general. However, I do think that those kind of phenomenon also happened back then. It's just in a different structure. Like, nobody watched Kolchak the Night Stalker when it was on TV, but that's because, that was for different reasons. It was more like you didn't know it was on, or it wasn't advertised well enough, or it didn't have as broad an appeal as you would think.
But Kolchak wasn't part of the monoculture.
Yeah, we are kind of siloed, but we have more access now than we did before.
We do.
But you also used to have syndication, or people taping stuff off TV. So you still had the ability to rewatch things later, but it's just...
That's true. Yes, it is more accessible, but what I'm saying is that to have something that is countercultural, something that is outside of the mainstream, you have to have a culture. You have to have a mainstream.
Well, yeah.
Otherwise, it's all just different things. Now, you can say you Kolchak. Yeah, but Kolchak wasn't Full House. Kolchak wasn't Dynasty. Kolchak wasn't MASH. Kolchak wasn't Seinfeld. You had things that everybody saw and everybody knew. Now, it wasn't a Axis thing at that time, but now if you put up a new version of Kolchak,
which they did,
now that doesn't hold any more weight on a streaming app screen than Landman, or what was the Dutton's Ranch show?
Yellowstone.
Yellowstone.
Never seen it. How do I know that?
Exactly. You're aware of it, so it has more cultural relevance than the third or fourth Kolchak remake. But you also, when there was a time when you had 4 movies at the multiplex, that's what was on, and you had 5 channels, maybe a couple other channels that you paid extra money for, and they all showed the same thing at the same time, and that's how we all identified at the office cooler the next day what happened on XYZ, because we all watched the same thing. We're all aware of what happened. But now it's free reign. And nothing stands out amongst other things because everything is the same. I mean, it's different if you're watching over-the-air TV, but again, that is such a small number compared to what it used to be, especially for generations now who are watching things on their TV, their Roku, their iPad, their phone.
Which is why CBS has shows that last for 17 seasons, because they have shows that appeal to old people who still remember watching TV over the air.
Yeah. And again, we can make rash generalizations on who is the primary market mover for a Law and Order or, a Survivor, a Dancing with the Stars. But I think there is an element of an older generation which hasn't adapted to streaming in the same way.
Boomers and Gen X, that's what we're talking about. Those are the people who watch on-air TV. Well, no, that's not true, though, because I know people that are younger than me that are obsessed with, and they all talk about it with each other, like Dancing with the Stars or Survivor or The Bachelor. Those things do still exist. Those are still pillars of on-air television.
There are. Those same pillars, they don't matter in the same way as K-pop Demon Hunters is a pillar of fandom and excitement and media intake, similar to a Dancing with the Stars. In fact, it may have more views globally than a Dancing with the Stars.
Yeah.
But, you have your unique things that you are into that is different for everyone, as opposed to what used to be where we had a few things that were for everyone. You may not even like those, and you would F off to something else. That is how you get Underseen Gems. That is how you get cult films. But when you now have it fractured where there isn't as much of a mainstream juggernaut to bet against, everything is equal. And it's not a bad thing. I'm not railing against that. It's exciting for us to have the ability to watch anything we want, but it does possibly hinder the uniqueness of underground cinema, underground media, things they're underseen, because essentially most things become underseen. Now, again, you have things that people gravitate towards a lot of times because of the content, the MCU. So many people have seen the MCU and they follow along with the MCU films. That's one of the last vestiges of what might equate to modern day monoculture in our fragmented mediascape. But when you're on your Disney Plus app, Guardians of the Galaxy 3 holds no more weight than The Sorcerer's Apprentice or The Devil Wears Prada.
Yeah, but doesn't the consolidation of those giant networks kind of lead more toward a monoculture? Just in sort of a different format? Because now that Disney owns Fox, Lucasfilm, Marvel, everything under the sun, doesn't that make it more mainstream?
I don't know, does it?
I think it's worth examining. Those things used to be more niche before Disney owned all of it. A lot of the phenomena we're talking about is back in the day, there used to be only 3 or 4 networks. That was it. And cable was kind of a niche thing. Your Larry Sanders, your HBO, yada, yada, yada.
Mm-hmm.
Then it became really diversified when we're at 1,000 networks going out there, like Sci-Fi Channel bringing stuff into the zeitgeist and Bravo and all that kind of stuff. But now that everything's consolidating again, it's we're back to where we were when there was just ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox. Because now you have Disney, Paramount, Warner Brothers, and increasingly less.
I would say yes and no. Yes, in that those big properties are now under the auspices of big mega corporate conglomerate. Just one, two, or three essentially companies own most of the media there.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but you are not forced to watch Captain America, the Falcon, or whatever.
Right.
Right?
I see what you're saying.
As opposed to if there was just a Disney channel and that was one of your 5 channels, then that's what they played. That's what you had to watch. And that everybody would be subjected to that same thing at the same time. But you're not forced to go to Disney Plus. You can go to, whatever other streaming service you want. And those other streaming services have nigh on infinite possibilities
Yeah.
to watch. Now, the algorithm and what the company pushes into your feed can influence what is brought to you. And you might have to work harder to find something different to watch, but there is no specific time, place, or product that everyone is interacting with at the same time.
Right, because like
It's
if you
all
yeah.
up to you.
Yeah, because like it used to be, I know what you're saying. If you wanted to watch TV, you had like 4 channels, and everybody saw the same number of things. There weren't like a bunch of things you could watch. And even if now we only have a few channels, they at least have so many options that you can watch on demand that it changes the game. Media isn't consumed the same way, but media isn't consumed the same way as when Metropolis came out. So this is an ever-changing, ever-evolving thing.
Oh, 100%. But I think it does come into the way that we view how we define these films and how we interact with them. Again, something like K-pop Demon Hunters, just for a relevant, modern, recent example, is something that kind of came out of nowhere. I think is still relatively underseen in the totality of people engaging with media, but has developed a fan base that is rabid for the product.
Mm-hmm.
They were so unprepared for the excitement around this that kids are clamoring for toys and outfits and anything with K-pop Demon Hunters that they have to go to Etsy for special made things because the licensing deals and none of the toys are ready. They just didn't expect this, but the demand is so much bigger than they anticipated.
I mean, it's basically what happened with Star Wars.
Well, he planned ahead when he made that contract, and I think there was a lot of there were some production issues that got in the way of them getting toys to market at the time they should have been.
Well, yeah, a lot of people turned him down.
I think for this, yes. But he knew ahead of time that I'm going to try and make some money by marketing this film outside of the theater. I don't think that the people behind K-pop Demon Hunters were prepared for the level of excitement and desire for things related to their film. Now, whether it's going to be thought of as a cultural touchstone or even a cult classic 10 years down the line, I don't know. I think there's a lot of stuff, especially for kids, that tends to be a bit more flash in the pan. One thing when I was going through making a list of things to discuss about modern and future cult classics. So cult classics may be going away. We're all getting segmented in our fractured mediascapes. But I think there are things that do bleed through. There are especially feature films that have found fan bases currently, and I think are just going to grow in appreciation into the future. And as a podcast of its time, I want to help expose some of you to things you may not have seen. I always find that enriching personally. We'd like to thank you for taking this journey with us down the strange, winding road of what cult films are and what they can be and what they will be. But until we become a cult classic ourselves, Skip, what should they do?
Well, they should probably clean up after themselves to some sort of reasonable degree, supported their local comic shops and retailers, and from Dispatch Ajax, we would like to say Godspeed, fair wizards.
Classic.